Boys and girls, we are back with another Fourth and Frames tonight. I'm your host, Red Manuel, here with two of the best of the business in Andrew Scott and Chris Battistell. And tonight we welcome a very special guest in ESPN's Eric Moody. We have plans to discuss some content creation and then hit on some of our favorite breakout candidates for redraft leagues in 2023. Without further ado, let's roll. So before we jump into it, please like our stream, subscribe to our channel, and hammer the bell to get notified whenever the Fantasy and Frames Network drops new content. And most importantly, please rate and review our podcast. And if you haven't done so yet, follow our show on Twitter at Fourth and Frames. Also, a quick reminder for those of us who are joining us on Twitter tonight, if you'd like to chime in and ask Eric or us a question, please join us on the YouTube stream. We can't see your questions on Twitter, but we are more than happy to get to them and hear what you got to say. So jump over to YouTube tonight to be an active part of tonight's discussion. While we're at it, none of this is possible without our producer of every Fantasy and Frame show, Gator J, my brother. We appreciate you. So, Drew, before we get started, I just had a quick question for you, man. There have been visual reports out of New Orleans that Derek Carr's days may be numbered. So, quick question. How good does Jake Haener look so far, man?
I think Derek Carr's job is probably safe for the moment, but what this whole Jake Haener thing has done is given me even more, motivation not to finish last in any of my leagues, because I feel like this is just going to turn into the typical last place punishment is to have to recreate these photos, and that's something that I don't want any part of. So it's motivated me probably more so than it has Derek Carr, I would think.
Yeah, man, for sure. So enough of that. We had some fun with that, but let's not waste any more time because we are so excited to have our guest with us tonight, man. He joined ESPN in 2021, and he's provided the world some of the best betting, fantasy football, and fantasy basketball content that we've got going on anywhere. He writes, he podcasts, he does videos. So we couldn't think of anybody better tonight to talk about content creation because my man literally does it all. And he's done it everywhere, from the Pro Football Network to ESPN, The Athletic, Fantasy Pros, RotoViz, you name it. He's been there. And if you've seen fantasy content, then you've seen his name, and he can be followed on Twitter at Eric N. Moody. So, Mr. Eric Moody, how the heck are you tonight, brother?
No, things are going great. I'm much better now, that all of you guys are here. So, I would say overall, things are going awesome. Family's doing well. Hey, summertime is right around the corner. NBA Finals is about to start. You got the WNBA season that's underway. It's really the calm before the storm for the NFL season. Summertime is always fun because you're going to see, I would say, a flood of fantasy football content get released. But anyway, enough about me. How are things with you guys?
Man, to be honest, I'm doing well. Like you said, family's healthy, family's happy. As a teacher, my school year just ended. So, we're getting ready to charge into summer. So we're feeling good, man.
Excellent.
So before we jumped into something, I saw you had a tweet earlier today about retro video games. So I kind of wanted to tie those things together. So what I want to ask you is this. Which fantasy football take throughout your career has been your Star Fox and Super Nintendo of fantasy football takes?
One that immediately came to mind is that, which one was it? It was something about, what's that Saints receiver? It was one that I kind of, it'll come to me. It's one that I kind of referred to, like this is a receiver like on the Saints. It's like the great value kind of version of player X. I'm trying to think about the receiver that I compared, but that's one that came to mind because they had a pretty good visual on it. It was funny because this was like probably back in 2016, 2017. Because I was excited because Evan Silva actually retweeted that. So I was pretty fired up. So, yeah, I ended up gaining a lot of followers on Twitter because of that. But I can't remember the name of the receiver, but who knows? It may come back to me midway through the show. And I'll stop and I'll bring it up again to kind of complete the story. But I would say that's the Star Fox when it comes to like a tweet or something like that.
Yeah, and you're talking to two Saints fans between me and Chris right here. So, if we'd be able to help you.
Too.
Yeah, we don't know the answer either. So It's fine. So look, let's get straight into it. Eric, we wanted to pick your brain tonight on some content creation. So Chris, you got $1 million question that you wanted to start our boy off with. Hit him with it.
I do, but before I get into the question, I'd be remiss if I didn't commend you on your GIF game on Twitter. I'm a big GIF guy, and seeing some of the stuff you drop tied into some of your tweets is second to none. But my question is, what are some key factors you consider when creating fantasy football content that resonates with your audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say that the first thing that really comes to mind is like a content creator. You really want to think about who is your audience? Like, who are you tweeting to, who you're writing to, who you're creating a video for. So visualize that person who's going to consume your content. I'm like, is it another fantasy football creator? Is it someone who's played fantasy football for 10 or more years, or someone playing fantasy football for the first time? You can go deeper down the rabbit hole because you're thinking, is it for redraft? Is it for Dynasty? But, you guys get where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. When you understand which audience the content is for, it makes it a lot easier to create it. But I always like to think of it this way. It's like, what are the biggest problems my audience is facing? Draft strategy, how to prepare for auction drafts, is it sleepers, who to target in the middle or late round. So I think those are really good questions, to ask yourself. And you may be wondering, if you're listening to this or watching it, you're like, okay, well, how do I get that information? How do I find out what the biggest problems are? Just talk to people. That's the beauty of social media. I'm like, it's a great place to do that. I'm like, you can ask your friends, your buddies, people you work with, but just ask people on social media if you're trying to build a following. It helps create a list of content ideas for you to have. But I'll kind of close on this. Even if you have something, I would say that you're thinking in your mind, you're like, you know what? I don't know. This seems like a very bad idea, but it may actually be a good idea. And so you just want to kind of really think about that idea and how you could support it. But I think it's important, if you're creating content, fantasy content, really to keep it simple. I would probably say the biggest mistake that I see new content creators make is really trying to tackle an overly complex idea, and they don't do the greatest job doing it. So I would say simplicity is really your best friend. It helps you shoot for an attainable goal, but it also guarantees too that the resulting idea, that you have in your mind can be really understood by readers or someone watching your video. I would say structure is also important, but just to bring all that together, I'll close on this point, is that you really just want to create a thesis for the content. Write out your bullet points of the support items that you have for that thesis, and really try to be as concise as possible when telling the story. Again, whether you're doing a podcast, live stream, or video. Because here's the reality. I'm like, people's attention spans have become shorter. So you really want to be as entertaining and free-flowing as possible to keep their engagement. But off the top of my head, those are some tips and kind of ideas that I keep on the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I know exactly where you're coming from. Is beginning with the end in mind first off. That's kind of an old teaching strategy we have, knowing where you want to go and then working backwards from there. I'm completely with you on that. And also with a little bit of a journalism background, like we said, keeping it simple, keeping it to the point, keeping it where people can understand it and digestible while entertaining them. It's a delicate balance, but it's something that really needs to be done. So with that being said, Drew, let's move into this next one, man. Let's go ahead and let's ask him about some trends and things like that, bud.
Yeah. So how do you stay ahead of the curve in terms of trying to identify emerging fantasy football trends and strategies? What the next hot thing is going to be, and try to get out ahead of it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can do, and it shouldn't come as a surprise, but you just being really disciplined and taking the time to really conduct in-depth research. Like if you're looking at all the teams, players, team dynamics, coaching changes, all those things help. Because, if you're giving advice, through videos or articles or podcasts, you want to try to be as informed as possible and think about it. Again, your audience, what would they want to know? And what story can I tell around that information? Again, it's got to be a story. It's got to be entertaining. It can't be like you're going to the doctor's office and relaying information. That's why people like movies. They like these TV shows, Netflix, all that stuff. You got to be entertaining. But I would say there continues to be an increased emphasis on analytics too. And so you want to be aware, of that space. Even if it's something that someone that's out there that's creating content or thinking, hey, that may not be a strength of mine, build the muscle, strengthen the muscle, because you want to at least kind of weave that in, when appropriate, when the content that you're creating. But I'll go a step further. I'm like, if I think you should be well versed on just not only like fantasy football, but DFS,
Hmm.
sports betting. So you want to be well versed in those things too, but it also helps to really cover multiple sports if you have the capacity for it. But I think by doing all those different things and really just putting the work in, conducting the research, you're going to be in a better position to identify patterns, potential breakout players. I would say another tip would just be, following others in the industry. I think that also helps, like, social media, because you'll kind of better
Right.
understand what others are doing, but it also allows you to understand what others are not doing. And
Hmm.
so I think that's where you can get, like an advantage, because if everyone's writing about in January about the rookie class, and this rookie class is great and all that, I'm like, you're going to want to relay that information, but what's a alternate angle that you can take kind of on that topic? And again, I'll tie it back to social media. I'm like, you build a following, you engage
Yeah.
with them, you can learn a lot from them, if you're building that community, and just to see some of the pain points and things that are on their mind. And just, I'll say the biggest thing is just always kind of look at things from different angles. Like an example, like off the top of my head, it's like, offensive line play is often overlooked, like in fantasy football. So uh,
That's true.
but if you're thinking about how to weave that into fantasy analysis, really what the fantasy managers or people that are playing or following the game want to know, I'm like, how does that improved offensive line positively impact like the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs of a particular team? So still dive into that offensive line analysis, but then kind of weave that into, here's how it impacts, say, Patrick Mahomes or Tyreek Hill or Jonathan Taylor. You guys get where I'm going with this. Those are
Yeah.
just some
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, no, I like that. And you talked a little bit about analytics. I know something that I've struggled with remembering is whenever you're talking about analytics or
Mm-hmm.
you're, just discussing player trends and things like that. Whenever we're doing a video or doing a live stream, instead of just rattling off, like this guy's A dot increased from this to this, slowing
Mm-hmm.
myself down and spelling it out. His average depth of target increased from here to here. This is what it means. This is why it's important, because a lot of the audience might already know why it's important, but there might be that small
Mm-hmm.
piece that doesn't, and you just lost them, at that point.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that I struggle with, that I try to remind myself now that we've started doing this. But uh, that's actually a good transition, because Red, I think you had an analytical based question that you wanted to run by him, right?
Before we
You're
get
still.
into that, I wanted to go ahead and get into this chat question from Jorge Edwards. Just ask, what advice would you have for those who are a bit shy when it comes to interacting with people, while at the same time trying to promote their content?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'll say if you have someone that's kind of more introverted and not extroverted, I think with social media, I'm like, you could still kind of type a response. Doesn't necessarily have to be a video or like an audio clip, excuse me, or like a podcast, but I'm like still just interacting with that person that way. And I know some people are uncomfortable, like kind of promoting, kind of their stuff, in what they're doing. But I think if you're on a platform, say like Twitter, for where I'm like, I can type something. It's like, hey, tell me about a sleeper. And I can type in John Doe's, who you want to target, blah, 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 blah. And then you can send that response. And then you can even follow that up with, I kind of mentioned some other sleepers that I like, kind of in this article. You could post like the link and stuff there. So that's kind of like a subtle, indirect way to still kind of promote, your content, but without feeling like, hey, I'm in someone's face with it. You got to read this or you got to listen to it. So this is kind of off the cuff, but hopefully that addresses that question.
Right, and I think it does. And I kind of want to get back into, you had talked a little bit about analytics in our last question.
Mm-hmm.
So, our question right now, or mine, is this. What are some tips that you can share with our watchers and our listeners about balancing those analytics with your own personal insights on a player when providing fantasy football advice?
Yeah, I think it's important to be well versed in both. And if it's analytics that you're not comfortable with, there's a lot of great books out there that kind of dive into kind of these analytics, which ones are popular, how they work, how they're calculated, and really by looking at these stats, like what are they telling you? Like you can easily say this player has an A dot of 10.5. It's like, that's great. Like how does that help solve my problem of looking for wide receivers to target? But you can
Right.
kind of tell that story and weave that in to kind of communicate that to the person. Again, your thesis, support item. But I look at it like a piano. I'm like, you could play music with one hand, but it's not going to be great music. But once you play the piano with both hands, you can truly create like great music. And so I look at that. I look at those two hands, I would say, as like analytics for one, and then the other, I would look at like kind of film study, because it helps understand. I'm like, on film, hey, here's what a player looks like. Here's what a player, can do, and look at all those traits. But the analytics kind of show you, I'm like, hey, looking at these traits and what this player can do, here's what it translates to like on the field. And then you can kind of compare, those analytics and stats to other players, because the thing with film analysis, it's subjective. Everyone's going to have their opinion, but if you can kind of support it with stats, that helps out quite a bit. What drives me batty is the I don't know what's the right word, but the conflict, we'll say, between like the film community and the analytics community. It like goes back and forth. My whole approach has always been, hey, let's just play the piano with both hands, when telling, a story, about a certain player, because I think that's where I'm like, you really gain, someone's attention, even if it's something like we're talking about, say, just John Doe, the Magic player. It's just like, you wouldn't think about it, but John Doe is truly a sleeper candidate that no one is talking about right now. And everyone kind of piqued their attention, like, John Doe, huh? And it's like, yeah, and here's why. Then you can even weave in, I'm like, and here's what I see when I look at John Doe on the field. You can go through your spill there and saying, hey, here's what the advanced metrics, the analytics, here's what they're showing me. The biggest problem, though, with John Doe is that he's not getting enough playing time. He's not getting enough snaps. But you know what? That's going to change in 2023. You want to kind of sell them and tell them the story. Think of it like this. I want to keep pounding these analogies in, because the better storyteller you become, I'm like, it makes it a lot easier to create content. Think of it as like you're at a campfire and someone's telling like ghost stories or something. I'm like, that person that's telling that story is gaining everyone's attention. So that's what you want to do in this fantasy football space. And you can do that with your writing, video, podcast, you name it. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, man, that's perfect, because one of the things during the rookie draft process, Dynasty, everybody's doing rookie drafts and everybody sees these numbers. This guy runs a 4.40 at 212 pounds. But then we were having discussions about a certain player. We won't get into a name, but me and Drew agreed that we watched like 90 seconds of film. And I'm like, this guy doesn't necessarily hit the hole very well. And other people are in love with him. So, I completely agree that, this piano analogy that you hit us with was fantastic. Like, love that. Just love the depth of that as well, for sure. So, Chris,
Yes.
You had a question about a challenge in terms of, the audience as a whole. Go ahead and let's get into it, buddy.
Yes, considering how much the betting side of things is becoming more legal across the country and how much the fantasy landscape is growing with its users, how do you approach the challenge of catering to both novice, the inexperienced managers, and the experienced fantasy football players?
Yeah, it's definitely a balancing act when creating content, because not everyone is going to be the person where I've played fantasy football for 10 to 15 years. I know the basics. I know this player should be in my lineup, that sort of thing. So it's got to be a balancing approach, because you have a lot of new managers that are playing like for the first time, and just a high percentage of players out there, I think they're casual players.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I think a lot of people in the community don't really want to accept. Not everyone's playing Dynasty. Not everyone cares about rookies. Most people are like, I don't even care about the NFL until August comes around. They don't know who was picked up in free agency. They don't know who was drafted. And so you got to have that balance. So with that said, I'm like, the approach I like to take, like with every piece of content I create, is I want to provide some elements that would appeal to the novice players, the people that don't pay attention, but also some nuggets in there to really satisfy the experienced fantasy managers. Like here's some examples. So, like last year, I wrote the ESPN Fantasy Football Daily Notes. I highlighted news that fantasy managers need to know. I'd always include news on players that many experienced fantasy managers know about. Whether, this person mispracticed or they could miss, the game, those kind of topics. But I would also have some write-ups too on like lesser known players who could be like sleepers for that week, or excellent streamers for that week. And that's the kind of stuff that's really going to pique the interest of the experienced fantasy managers, because they're like, I never really thought about that person as a potential streamer. I'll kind of keep that on my radar in case, I need it. Like the waiver wire column is another example for where, for my recommendations, I try to appeal to managers in league sizes, anywhere from like 10 to 14 team leagues. Because it's funny, on Twitter, you'll have someone that's just like, yeah, like I know that, John Doe is someone I need to pick up, but I'm telling you, John Doe hasn't been available in my league for 2 weeks. That type of person. I was like, I get that, but not everyone is in a league that's as competitive as yours, and that's okay. I'm gonna have some players for where they're going to be readily available, like in casual leagues, but I'm always going to have some players there, like some really deeper guys, that exact person that I mentioned on Twitter or social that may say, that comment that, hey, that's going to be a player that could appeal to them. They're like, you know what? That player is actually still available in my league. I'm in a really deep league, so I may consider picking that player up. But that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, man, no doubt. And it was something that jogged my memory as you were talking just now. Working at a place like at ESPN where you have a much wider audience, where some of the content is more not behind a paywall, versus working somewhere like a RotoViz where you're behind a paywall, you have these big analytics minded sort of users. How does knowing what those audiences want, how does that drive where you might go with a particular piece in that situation?
Yeah, it's just about knowing, knowing like your audience for where. I'm just thinking, like you mentioned a great example, like with RotoViz, and obviously I know how RotoViz works because I wrote there for articles there for many years, and I would just say, like, thinking about like with ESPN, it's like you're gonna have a lot of people that are playing in maybe 18 leagues, 10 team leagues. Of course, you're gonna have like your 12 and 14 team leagues, but a high percentage of leagues, when you're looking at like families that are playing and casual players, are going to be like shallow leagues, 8 to 10 teams. But to your point, like with a place like RotoViz, for where, again, everything's behind like a paywall, is for where I'm like, you do want to have more kind of deep cuts, things that aren't quite like it is obvious. And that kind of ties back to one of my earlier answers for where, and this could apply wherever you're writing, many of the places in the industry is for where you just kind of want to think about, like, is that really like a good idea to write for an article or like a bad idea? Like everyone knows that, they need to start like Justin Jefferson or Devontae Adams or, those players like that. But I think really area of opportunity, if I'm just thinking off the top of my head, would be some of those players that are kind of like your flex players that managers could use like as a flex option. So maybe that's a better thesis, to focus on players like that, that I can insert into my starting lineup, and then coming up with reasons on why that person's a great candidate. Or even looking at like wide receiver, cornerback matchups, who are some under the radar guys that I can insert into a lineup. Offensive line, defensive line, kind of versus, like kind of looking at an analysis that way. Excuse me. It's for where it's trying to figure out which running backs could have an edge in this matchup, even though they haven't been as productive as certain fantasy managers would have liked. So that's just kind of the angle to kind of take with it. You want to think of things that are unique, that not everyone's doing, that could be like really, really valuable. So hopefully that kind of answers that question.
Right. No, perfectly.
Yeah.
So Drew, let's go ahead and let's talk about, there's been some invites going on with the Scott Fish Bowl over the past week or so. So go ahead, fire away at Eric, man.
Yeah, so the first question, the obvious one is, are you participating in the Scott Fish Bowl this year?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So get that out of the way before I ask the rest of the question. So
Congrats.
I'm assuming you probably got your invite already, which means that you've had an opportunity to select, which division you're playing in, which I won't ask you to reveal unless you want to. But the thing that I'm most curious about is, in terms of selecting your draft slot, what's your strategy behind that, with like, knowing the league format, things like that? What's your thought process on picking out your league slot or your draft slot?
Yeah, like this will be the first year, I'm able to do like a live draft, so I'm excited about that. But
Nice.
I always like kind of picking between, the 10 through 12. So I believe I'm at the 12th spot for this year. So I always like kind of drafting like from the turn, just in order to land, two top tier players pretty quickly. I just think it's a great draft spot, especially if you're looking to try to capitalize on like players that are at or great value or sleepers. But probably most importantly, it kind of gives me a chance to get ahead of positional runs, because I always look to see kind of how many at each position others in the league have, like quarterbacks, running backs, etc., and then try to predict when those position runs like occur. It's always like being at the turn, because I can kind of get ahead of that by picking a quarterback if I need one, or a wide receiver or running back just before the position run happens.
Right. I always feel a little less guilty reaching whenever I'm on one of the ends too. And then,
Mhm.
with the Scott Fishbowl having the third round reversal, you get that
Yeah,
that pick right there at the top of the third too. So I like that. So
exactly.
yeah, anybody that is listening, if you haven't already, um go to scottfishbowl.com, go get signed up. There's a chance you could get to play along some of your favorite fantasy analysts, such as Moody here with us, among a lot of other people. And then along the way, you get to help out a wonderful organization in Fantasy Cares and donate money to a good cause as well. So if you're not already signed up, go do that right now and get a chance to get to play with some of these guys.
Yeah, and whether you're playing or not, go ahead and just support regardless. Buy some
Yep.
merch, get it out there. Just help out, because they're helping out a lot of people this year
Yes.
through Scott Fishbowl, just as they do every year. So we're gonna go ahead and keep it moving from there. Moody, be it YouTube, Twitter, I guess even Facebook to an extent, whatever that platform is, how do you as a creator determine the most effective platform or format for delivering your fantasy football content to maximize your audience engagement, man?
Yeah, like you mentioned some great platforms. I just think social media, like in general, is great, because you may have someone out there that wants to create content. They may want to create like a website, like, or a newsletter, stuff like that, which is great. But the reality is, if you don't have any type of like a lead magnet or something to drive traffic to it, I'm like, it's really like irrelevant. So what I love about social media is that I'm like, if you truly like take the time, and it does take time, it does take consistency and work, to really build up like a huge audience. But once you do, I'm like, it could really pay like huge dividends, because one thing about like social media, I'm like, you have like a wide reach with it. Everyone can access it. A lot of people have Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, TikTok accounts, YouTube, you name it. I'm like, you can post, of course, videos. I know you mentioned, my my meme and video game is strong. Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Infographics. You can post threads that are out there, and what I like about like all those things that I mentioned is that they're going to capture someone's attention. It's going to stimulate like engagement, and
Yep.
it's going to like encourage the consumer, whoever's looking at that, watching that, or reading it, really to take action. And it's really going to increase the likelihood of converting them like into leads, or if you're trying to add or grow like an email list or email subscribers, or simply getting someone to look at your article or website. Again, if you post up like a follow-up tweet with a link or a call to action. I'll say the thing that drives me batty. This may sound controversial, but you know what?
Let's hear it.
Just like Michael Keaton in Batman '89, you want to get nuts?
Yes.
Let's get nuts. Come on,
get
let's get
nuts.
nuts. So I'll just say what drives me insane is that if someone posts like a link to an article that they created, just with the title or something, like John Doe, is great, blah blah blah, link. I'm like, on Twitter, it's like the Twitter algorithm, the way that it works. If you're posting links, it's just really going to deprioritize that tweet. You're not going to get the reach, the impressions that you're looking for. But if you kind of like tease it for where, let's say if it's a one on sleepers, like 10 deep sleepers in the double digit rounds that you should know about. If you have like a hook where you're talking about those sleepers, even if you put like 3, so it's like 3 deep sleepers, you'd be an idiot if you don't know about whatever the headline is. That's fine. And then from there, do like a mini thread for where you're highlighting some of the info from that article with those 2 or 3 players. And then at the end, hey, to find out the 7 other sleepers, then you put the link. By doing that, I'm like, your tweet's not going to get deprioritized with the algorithm. Plus, it's going to get a lot of eyes on it, a lot of engagement, a lot of impressions, and that's just a better way to do it. It's almost like, let's have a little bit of an appetizer out there and some different things, and then post a link that's going to your content. You always want to have like a call to action, whether it's, hey, sign up for my email list, check out this article, follow me, you name it. And so you can do that with, if you have a good meme that's out there, a good kind of tweet with a reaction video, or even like with a thread. You can do that, and that's a nice way to kind of tease your articles. But anyway, I'm off that high horse there. So I would say the more I'll say the more social proof and credibility that you have, it's easier to maximize your audience. And
Sure.
Some people may not want to hear this, but it is what it is. It's that like you have to have like a following. People are gonna judge you in a way by the following that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to set like thresholds. If it's like you're starting out, it's like you want to get to 100 followers as quickly as possible. You want to get to 1,000 followers. Once you get at 10, that's good. But you always want to keep kind of shooting and aiming, for a higher number, because you want to think about it is that how can I leverage that following, that I built. Is it an email list? Is it just getting eyes on my articles? Because you look to see when you post links to see the interactions with them and see how that's working. So it's a lot of different ways that you can take it. You can determine like what the scoreboard is, but I just think it's important, especially if you want to be serious about being a content creator, is to really build up that following. So that social proof is important. And I'm kind of going long here, but I think this is good stuff. Is that
it is.
Great stuff.
Is that I'm like I've been in the trenches and stuff there. I'll tell you this. I'm still as driven today at this particular point in time as I was whenever I first started creating content, like back in 2015. I look at it like I'm climbing like Mount Everest, and I'm nowhere near the top, of where I want to get to. But in those early days, I'm like, it's hard getting 100 or 1,000 followers.
Sure.
But I just engaged with a lot of people, answered a lot of questions, and just kind of earned, true fans, I would say, like kind of one tweet like at a time. But you got to be consistent. You got to show up every day. And I just got to the point for where, I was like, I wanted more from the social platforms. Like, I love Twitter. It's my favorite one. But I'm trying to grow on others right now as well. And I'm just like, what are some things that I can do to kind of get better on the platform? And so I really took a lot of time. This is something on my kind of yearly to-do list. I always put myself on I like to call it my own performance improvement plan every year on stuff I want to get better at. Social media was one of them. And so with that time that I was able to kind of invest in learning how to grow on social, like it really paid dividends. So I'll kind of close on this is that I would say people are drawn to like personalities and not necessarily brands. So put your personality out there, and people will gravitate to it. Like for me, I obviously talk about those three sports that I cover, but I love 1990s type of nostalgia. I'll tweet about that. Love hard rock music, heavy metal. I'll kind of weave those things in. I know everyone's not necessarily there for those takes, but like, you know what? I kind of like what Moody posted there. I was into that too. I'm going to respond to that. But I'm like, you can repurpose like all of your written content like for multiple platforms. Like you got an article that's out there, make a video of it. You can do that on YouTube or just a video and post it to Instagram or Twitter. You got tweets, like you can post questions to your audience. You can do lists, like you can do threads. So you just want to think of it like a infinite wheel of content, just on ways that you can kind of leverage like an article that you wrote and put out there. So all right, I'm done for that question. Drop the mic, baby.
You could have gone as long as you wanted. We'd have been all good with that. But we had a question from Tyler Hill, one of our boys, and you talked about written content in 2023. How important is that written content these days?
Yeah, I really like that question because whenever I started, kind of this journey, it's written was really the way to go. Written content. Then they had, they obviously podcasts and stuff were big. So I would say that I think written content is important, but I'm like, if you're doing videos and podcasts, you can still build a following that way too. But I say the more important question is, it's like, what's your end game I'm like, how are you planning on monetizing that? I'm like, if it's articles or newsletter, if you want people to pay to see that, hey, that's an angle to take. But if it's a podcast, are you getting sponsors? I'm like, what's driving revenue from that podcast or those videos and things like that? So that's just kind of the angle that I'll look at it from, like from a business lens, is like, how are you going to monetize that? Like, what's your goal? And so I'm like, you can do that. That's fine if you don't want to do written content, but I still think written content is something that's looked at often. I think the difference is that these opuses of 5,000 words, read this, I'm great, blah blah blah. Those days are over. I'm just like, it's like no one's gonna read 5,000 words of this stuff. So I'm like, keep it tight. I think 750 to 1,000 words is ideal, but if you can even get it lower than that, that's fine too. But I think written content still plays a part. But I would close on this with answering that question, is that you want to be what's kind of the right word? I guess versatile is probably the right word. You want to be able to do written content, be able to do audio and video and things like that. And I'll tell you this, if you're uncomfortable with this, like, I don't like getting on video, I don't like it. I'm like, for one, I say you need to get over that, but you do need to practice and get the reps in. So get some podcast experience, get some video experience, and then find someone that you feel comfortable with getting like feedback from on how to get better on anything, whether it's written content, audio, video. But you got to get the reps in, and it's not going to be perfect from day one, but you just build each and every rep that you get. I kind of do the same thing, like even now, like I did ESPN Bet like earlier, the digital show. And I always kind of think for a few minutes, like after that show, I'm like, what could I have done differently with delivering this message? What can I do to get better? So never really stops. But anyway, I'll stop now. I want to play one of those guitars.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you want to stop talking about that, you could just grab a guitar and start playing.
So look, Drew had a question about one of the things that in our business is the lifeblood, which is ranking. So Drew, go ahead and fire away on it, bud.
Yeah, and this is so with me joining Fantasy and Frames, this has really been my first time of like really building Redraft, Dynasty startup, rankings in that aspect, and putting my name on guys, putting my stamp on guys, and not for the sake of being hot take-ish. I don't want this to sound like you're purposely trying to put out a hot take just to get clicks. Not from that standpoint, but whenever that something that you, one of your opinions that you truly believe, it's a little bit controversial, whether it's player rankings or a recommendation, whatever that case may be, that as soon as you hit send and you put this out there on the Twitter sphere, that your mentions are just going to get destroyed. How do you handle that? How do you process that, and how do you deliver that, knowing the backlash that you could get from it?
Yeah, I think as long as you have a logical methodology and reason behind your recommendation, I believe that helps. And this was something for where just before doing sports full time, it's like, I work in the financial services industry, so I'd recommend like mutual funds, I'd recommend like stocks, things like that. And so even though the person where they see that recommendation is like, that's a terrible recommendation, that mutual fund is crap, or that ETF is garbage, or this stock, et cetera. But as long as you have like a rationale and a reason on why you're making that recommendation, how'd you come to the decision that you made, I think that's what you need, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be people that may not agree with you, and on social, they're always going to let you know that. But at the end of the day, I'm like, you're going to win some, and you're going to lose some. But I'm like, you're kind of striking a chord for where, like, I just think back, I can't think of the exact name, and I won't necessarily share the name, but it's just like, someone asks you for like a recommendation where it's like, recommend these players, and they obviously disagree like on one of them. And they're like, man, why'd you recommend that guy, man? This is horrible. I just don't think that's just going to work out, whatever. And then like 3 hours later, where those 3 recommendations had like 20, 25, 15 fantasy points. And then they circle back. It's like, yeah, I'm glad you gave me that advice. That ended up working out, peace. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And so I just kind of went through that in the previous industry, for not everyone's going to agree with your recommendations. And I think the stakes are different now, because back then it's like, if I'm making a recommendation on like investments and things like that, you obviously want to see those investments go up and do well, but there's some cases for where they don't. And you have someone that, may lose money for a little bit before it ends up going back up like a month or two later. And so it's just, you kind of have to take that accountability and that ownership with that, saying, hey, not all the recommendations are going to hit, but it's people out there that want advice and need help. And I think as long as you have like a process that you take those recommendations through and a rationale for making it, and you're not shooting from the hip, I think people respect you for that. So that's how I would handle it.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I know you talked about some of your pet peeves with social media. I know one thing that I can't stand. It doesn't happen to me too much, but just like looking at the mentions of some other bigger creators, like yourself, whatever, you put out a really well thought out tweet and then you get a bunch of responses of like, well, this sucks or you're wrong. And then that's it. That's the end of the discussion. Like there's no, here's why I disagree. Here's my opinion. It's just, like I love getting into sports debates and go back and forth, and discuss why we think the way that we think. But the just you're wrong, period. It absolutely kills me. So that's one thing that I'm trying to prepare myself to navigate. But I mean, speaking of social media, Chris, I think you had another question that ties into that.
Yes, I do. How do you leverage social media and user interactions to create a sense of community and enhance your fantasy football content?
Yeah, and I really like this question too, because the community and that tribe piece is really important. I just think one mistake that content creators make is that they don't view social media really for what it is. And, it's about, kind of making friends, whether it's through, followers or true fans, whatever you want to call them, or other content creators, that you interact with. And what I love about it really allows your personality to show through, which helps kind of make a connection like with others on the platform. And I think that community piece is like really like important. That's why I like to tweet out like a lot of questions, try to tweet questions that people want to answer and just kind of have a dialogue about it. Kind of like a back and forth, and you kind of get to know people. It's funny because it's some people that I'm like, they've been, I guess, following me like for nearly like 7 years at this point. And they've been there like every step of the journey. And it's always good kind of seeing some of those names pop up in your mentions, And I would say another thing is really take the time to answer questions like from your followers. And so, and that was, that was really like my angle, like in the early days. So if you're ground zero, you got 50 followers and like you want to build your community, your fans, and you feel like you're competing like with giants, out there. I'm like, I still remember. I do not forget. It's for where it's like, I'm like, some people, the bigger accounts, not all of them are going to take the time like to answer like questions for where, and so that's what I would just do. It's just like people are asking questions. I'm like, they're not getting answered. I'll just go in and answer them, kind of give them my rationale, and I built up a lot of followers that way. And so take the time, to engage. I think that'll end up paying. You're paying, huge, dividends, and really ask your followers questions too. This kind of ties back to the earlier question we were talking about content for where, what are the challenges that they're dealing with. That's a great way to enhance your fantasy football content too, and to get ideas. But put yourself out there as a thought leader, like with some of your posts. Put some threads and things that are out there. And the beauty about the fantasy football or NFL or sports space is that, like, there's news that's happening, like every day by the hour. So Adam Schefter tweets something, Ian Rappaport, all those names. Have like an opinion on what's going on. Have a well thought out opinion and put it out there. Like that's how you're going to build like true fans. So what I love about social media and like content in general is that it's a great way to kind of spark your mind with ideas. So read and consume everything that you can. Quality is more important than quantity though, but it can at least give you some ideas on kind of a different angle that you can take on certain content, or it may then take your mind into a different direction. So I'll kind of close like on this with this question is that, and this is kind of leaning more towards the enhance your fantasy football content part of the question, is for where, just take like a lot of notes like on everything. Probably the app that I use like the most on my phone, it's not Twitter. I would say it's Google Keep, because it at least allows me to jot down like a lot of ideas. I could be at the park or something where wife and I are there and the kids are like playing or something like that, where an idea will pop into my mind. Like it could be for a tweet, it could be for like a piece of content, and I'll just make a note so I don't miss those things because I'm writing them down. And then that one idea can end up kind of spilling into others. I like to do like a mind map quite a bit. Put one singular idea like in the middle of a sheet, put a circle around it, and then you can kind of have branches that kind of branch out on different content ideas out of that singular idea. So you always want to be in I guess the right word is in creator mode. You always want to be on, and that kind of ties back to the music thing with the guitars and stuff that are back there. It's like, you're kind of ready to play, ready to go, like at any time. And so that's why it's important to really make note of all those ideas. But by doing a lot of those things, you really build up a lot of true fans and build up that community. It takes some work. So
definitely,
I kid you not, it takes some work, but you got to come to play like every day and try to align yourself with others who have that same mentality, because that's the way you're going to get that growth. So.
Yeah, one of my favorite strategies of creating a community for myself was just going into Twitter, search bar, search fantasy football, look up the latest or top issues that people were having fantasy football questions, and just going in and answering a bunch of those questions. That eventually led to people following me on my account. But Rhett had a good question here about the strategies of fantasy football creation.
Yeah, and before we get into that, if there are any users who have any questions that they'd like to fire off, let us know before we get out of here today. But in terms of strategies and evolving in this space, what are some things that you do to be constantly evolving and improving your content?
Yeah, and I really like this question too, is because you always want to be kind of driven. You want to have goals, and if they're ambitious goals, I'm like that's fine. I'm like, some people may think they're crazy, but I can tell you just from my journey is that just anything can happen. As long as you kind of put the work in. But I think it's important, like every off season, to kind of reevaluate your process. You want to be able to determine like what needs to be changed, like or adjusted. So I mentioned earlier about put yourself through that performance improvement plan or that performance review. Don't be afraid to ask others that you're working with, because feedback is a gift. If you have someone that really gives good feedback, you want to try to leverage that person as best as you can, because not everyone does. So if you've got editors that you're working with and trust, ask them for genuine feedback. Same thing comes for whether you're doing a podcast or videos or things like that. And I think it's important, if you're serious about this, is really to pick like one or two areas you'd like to improve on like every year, whether it's podcast or live streams or YouTube videos, or I want to get better at social media. Because if you have that as a goal, what you felt like may have been a weakness is ultimately going to become a strength. And so that's something that I ended up doing. Like early on, like I was thinking, okay, I want to do more podcasts. Let me do more podcasts to get better and build that muscle. The next year, another thing along those lines may have been video. I want to get better at doing video and being on camera. So let me kind of work more like in that area. And so also just do a lot of reading too. It's a lot of distractions out there, guys.
Is there ever?
I'm like, people talking about Netflix and all these different shows and stuff like that. It's funny because, when I sometimes I'll post tweets about, I'm finally getting around to watching, like Game of Thrones or something like that. It's like I just have a list of stuff I wouldn't mind watching, like on my list, on my watch list, but it's just not a priority, because I feel like I want to use that time doing other things. Being a better content creator or building, a bigger following on social media. So I spend my time kind of doing those things that are very productive. But spend a lot of time reading though. Whether it's like books on copywriting, NFL coaching, scouting, how to get better at social media, things like that. So just think about how you use your time. And it's funny because I didn't get around to finally watching like Game of Thrones until like earlier this year. And how long has the show been off the air?
Yeah, it's been some time.
Seriously, I had not seen an episode at all. It was a great show, the last season wasn't, but that's a whole other conversation. But it's just like, prioritize, if you're serious about this, prioritize your content creator journey.
Sure.
But anyway.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I still haven't watched it. So you were not the last person on earth to watch it, at least.
All right, gotcha.
Yeah, and I haven't seen The Sopranos either, so it's fine.
I haven't seen that one either. Everyone says you need to watch The Sopranos. It's like I may get around to it. We'll see. Right. We'll see.
So yeah, Eric, that's awesome. We appreciated your time, and that was killer for anybody looking to break into the space or improve their game. But now we got a few minutes left. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's talk about some breakout guys we're going to have in 2023. So with that being said, the floor is yours. You're first out here. Let us know somebody, man.
Yeah, I would say one player that comes to mind that I am trying to target in so many leagues is Jordan Addison. So what I like
Chris is
about
gonna love that one.
Yeah, what I like about Addison, you got to think about it this way. Once he heard his name called at the NFL draft, and he had to be thinking to himself, "Hey, I've landed in the perfect spot with the Minnesota Vikings." You look at this Minnesota team; they needed a number 2 wide receiver, specifically one that is versatile enough to play into the slot. And you know what? I know Addison was thinking this, and I know I was thinking this watching the draft, and I'm sure those that are watching thought it too, is that, hey, he fits the bill. Like, this is a guy that after an All-American season at Pitt, when in 2021, I'm like, and that's a season in which he led like the NCAA in receiving touchdowns with 17, I believe. I'm like, Addison ended up finishing his career at USC. He ranked second in receiving yards in college football from 2021 to 2022. And from watching this guy on film, but one aspect of his game that I've loved the most is really his route running ability. I'd go as far as to say he's one of the best route runners in this year's draft class. And you got to think about where he's going. He's going to Minnesota. He's playing for the Vikings, a pass first offense, in my opinion. You got Kirk Cousins that's there. You got Justin Jefferson is their wide receiver 1. And if you dive deeper, I'm like, that's a team that consolidates like a high percentage of targets. I'm like the Justin Jefferson and also their wide receiver 2. And so we all remember, and some people may have fond thoughts on Adam Thielen, right? I'm like, this is a guy, he still caught 70 of 107 targets for 716 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns last year. I look at it like this, gentlemen. That's Addison's floor in 2023. But I believe his ceiling could be even higher. And one thing about playing and lining up alongside Justin Jefferson, I know Justin Jefferson does a lot of gritties and is catching a lot of balls, but commands a lot of defensive attention. But that really means that Addison, I'm like, he's never going to see like a double team. So when you bring all that together, I look at Jordan Addison as someone that I believe can be viewed as a high-end flex option. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does have some wide receiver 2 weeks. So that's the breakout candidate that I'm in love with right now.
Yeah, there's some extra attention that's also being taken away from with TJ Hawkinson, who had a great emergence once he ended up in Minnesota last year, too.
Yeah.
So, Chris, I know you have another receiver that you want to talk about real quick, man.
Yeah, for me, it's Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Drake London. He's about to unleash his inner scorpion to be the breakout wide receiver of 2023. And I'm going to tell you why. It's going to be the views from all spots on the field. London's versatility and adaptability make the Falcons comfortable, lining him up everywhere on the field to exploit opposing defenses. This is shown by his splits where he lined up in the slot 21.6% of the time and out wide 78.4% on last season. But late into the year, primarily week 17 and 18, he saw a near 50-50 split when getting into position. It was this versatility that led to London soaking up a 29.39% target share, where he was top 5 in the league, ahead of studs like the aforementioned Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Also, there's more life into this offense. The Falcons have signed Matt Collins and Scotty Miller from the Bucks. They also used their first-round pick on Bijan Robinson. Not to forget, we get the phenom tight end Kyle Pitts back into the fold. But it's the Bijan pick that is most significant because a player of that magnitude, a player of that talent, is going to keep the defenses honest, forcing them to respect the running game of the Falcons. According to playerprofiler.com, Tyler Algier, the top Falcons running back last season, saw an average of 6.7 defenders in the box. So that's your very basic 4 D linemen, 2 linebackers they are seeing most of the time. Bijan is going to change that, therefore opening up opportunities for Drake London. On top of that, nothing was the same for him once Desmond Ridder was named starter for the Falcons. During that time, that 4-game stretch, Drake London posted his season high in yardage and was consistently targeted down that stretch. Through those 4 games, Drake London averaged 9 targets, 6.25 receptions, and 83 yards. Now that Ritter has been named the starter for the Falcons this upcoming season, I don't project anything to change in that category in terms of his usage. On top of that, he's the certified lover boy of the end zone. Although Drake London only caught 4 touchdowns on the season last year, the 6'4", 200-pounder is poised to use his red zone and spatial awareness, his physicality, and leaping ability to come down with more contested catches. A player that was top 10 in the league, according to PFF, where he held a 53.8% contested catch rate percentage last season, ahead of players like Michael Pittman Jr., DK Metcalf, CeeDee Lamb, and Stephon Diggs. And as of right now, on the scoring of the players that defenses played last season at the position, the Falcons have one of the easier schedules coming into the year. They get Carolina, Indianapolis, and the Chicago Bears to end the fantasy year. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the play of Desmond Ritter and the play calling of Dave Ragone that will determine the success of Drake London. But he is ready to do right and kill everything. And my projections of 90 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns is going to put him into that mid to top end wide receiver 2 spot. But please, for more info on Drake London, go check out my man D's Dynasty Target profile on the Fantasy and Frames YouTube channel, and thank me later.
Very nice, very nice. So, Drew, I know you had a receiver as well you want to talk about quickly.
Yeah, so I have no idea how I'm supposed to follow up somebody that just put in every single Drake album reference into a Drake London breakdown. Like, how do you? I thought that I was a Drake fan, man, and I've never done anything like that. So I got to step up my game. But with that being said, so my choice was actually somewhat. I guess the thought process came after I saw one of Moody's tweets, actually. So he had put out a tweet a few days ago that said last season 6 of the top 15 wide receivers in fantasy football were drafted in the 5th round or later, and then listed those guys. Made it known that it's important not to overlook the middle rounds of your draft. And I was curious, so I went and looked at underdog ADP, looked at the guys going in that range, and found some guys that I like. The guy I ended up picking for this segment is just outside of that 5th round. He's in like the middle of the 4th round, but it's Jerry Jeudy with the Denver Broncos. The wide receiver room actually got a little bit more crowded following the NFL draft with the Broncos selection of Marvin Mims in the 2nd round. However, I still believe that Jerry Jeudy is the most talented wide receiver on this team. There's also the rumors that Courtland Sutton could be on the move, which, would obviously be much more beneficial for Judy's outlook. But even as things stand, I still like Jeudy a ton this year. He's currently the wide receiver 24 in underdog ADP, which to me feels like you're drafting him at his floor. Last year, he was wide receiver 22 while playing 70+% of snaps in only 11 games. So if you look at just those 11 games, he was 15th in targets per game and 10th in yards per game among wide receivers. And we really started to see the breakout begin once he started getting comfortable after that midseason injury last year. The last 6 games of the season, he was 5th in receiving yards, and he had a 25% target share. Now, I know you wouldn't know it if you just look at his end-of-season stats, but Jeudy was also top 20 in yards per route run, yards per target, yards per reception, and fantasy points per route run and fantasy points per target. So he was very, very efficient with the targets he did get. And Russell Wilson, he might not get back to the level of play we saw while he was in Seattle, but I also don't believe that he is as bad as what we saw last year either. I think it's somewhere in the middle in terms of what we can expect from Russ. So if you talk about improved quarterback play, an upgraded head coach with Sean Payton coming into town, I think the sky's the limit for Jerry Jeudy. And if we can see just a slight increase in that 20% target share that he saw the entire season to, around that 25% mark that we saw post-injury midseason last year, I think that, wide receiver 24 is a pretty safe bet with where he's being drafted right now.
Yeah, man, I understand that, and that feels good about that. So, Moody, Drake London, Jerry Jeudy, thoughts?
No, I really like Drake London because a lot of people have kind of leaving Drake London out there for dead after how his rookie season progressed. I am optimistic about Desmond Ridder. Never underestimate the growth that a player can have, especially a rookie from one season to the next. He's got his first full NFL offseason, so I think Drake London is someone that can easily exceed fantasy managers' expectations. I also like the Jerry Jeudy recommendation too, because I would say the rapport that he had with Russell Wilson last year was very, very noticeable. But I think the addition of Sean Payton to this coaching staff is huge. We all know about the success that he had in New Orleans with Drew Brees and that explosive Saints offense. And so I really like Jeudy quite a bit. And I know he's someone that I've been targeting heavily in mock drafts that I've participated in. So again, he's another player who can easily exceed expectations when you look at the player's ADP. And so I do like both of those selections.
Appreciate you, Moody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, and we appreciate your time because, boys, we did it. Another Fourth and Frames is in the books. And, of course, a special thanks to Moody for joining us tonight. And we're going to give you the floor one more time. Plug anything you've got going on right now, be it inside or outside of fantasy football.
Yeah, I would just recommend, for everyone, check out all of my content over at ESPN. Again, NFL, NBA, WNBA content. And I cover all three of those sports from a fantasy and sports betting perspective. But I would say most importantly, be on the lookout for a lot of fantasy football content this summer over at ESPN.com/fantasy. Now, if you're not already following me on various social media platforms, stop what you're doing and change that. You can find me at Eric N. Moody on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Now, if you like sports, music, and nostalgia, you'll be right at home. But I would say last but not least, if you're a content creator that's watching this and you're looking for some guidance, you're looking for some help, my DMs are open on Twitter. So don't hesitate to reach out. I always like kind of communicating with others in the fantasy football community and always happy to help. So that's it.
Dude, I appreciate that. And we appreciate you so much for joining us tonight. It was so much fun. And on behalf of Drew and Chris, we really appreciate you taking your time so much. And thanks again to all of our listeners and watchers who joined us on the stream tonight. And just a reminder, you can find my boy Drew on Twitter at Drew3MR, Chris at FFChrisB, and myself at Rmanuel Sports. And once again, don't forget to follow our show account at Fourth and Frames. Once again, for Chris Batista and Drew Scott, and for Mr. Eric Moody, I am Red Manuel. You guys be good to each other, be well, and of course, be blessed. We gone.